Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I think we get to cover all of these things. We'll be starting in just 1 second here. I just want to check in with everyone. We're all good to go. Okay. All right. We are so excited to be here tonight with you, or early in the morning for us. And we welcome you to the UN Climate Dialogue side event session presented through the Ringo constituency. We will be talking today about research around implementing the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda at multiple scales to accelerate climate action. Thank you for joining us from the place you call home and for making time to understand and explore what ACE work may mean internationally and within your own context. Please know that all links within this presentation are found in the document linked to our event title on the UN Climate Dialogue side event page. We encourage you to explore these resources later and take the time now to listen as we share with you the exciting emerging research around Action for Climate Empowerment efforts globally. If you have questions during the presentation, we ask you to use the Q&A function. Is there anything else that we should share at this moment, or we're good? Okay, thank you.
We'd like to begin this morning, afternoon, evening with an Indigenous acknowledgement. As a result of settler colonialism, Indigenous peoples and colony residents have experienced histories of violence, genocide, cultural erasure, occupied land, marginalization, intellectual theft, and subordination. This has led to international trauma of many kinds. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted by the UN General Assembly, and in solidarity with Indigenous nations and communities of these lands, we'd like to ground our own work together in the articles of this declaration, acknowledging that Indigenous peoples have the right to free, prior, and informed consent in all aspects of human activity within their ancestral territories, their current communities, and their political, social, cultural, scientific, educational, and other organizations and practices. These rights and others, as outlined in UNDRIP, and are outlined there, and we ask everyone in our joint work to take time to familiarize yourself with them. The history of settler colonialism is not the only history of oppression. Our founding documents in the US dehumanized Black peoples brought to these lands against their will and subjected to violence of all kinds. In solidarity with Black Lives Matter, we acknowledge past and current racial violence, as well as multiple forms of colonization against Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color, and take responsibility to desettle and abolish continued social, economic, and political injustices. Finally, we would like to take a moment to recognize that we are all coming together today from across the globe at the intersection of these three global crises: a global reckoning for racial justice, the continued growing crisis of climate change, and a pandemic that has completely brought our planet to a halt and has killed almost 1.5 million people. Please take a moment of silence for the lives we have lost around the world. Thank you. We know that there are solutions to be found at the intersection of these crises and are glad to be together with you all today to share how Action for Climate Empowerment is critical to accelerate climate action.
I'm Dr. Deb Morrison with the University of Washington, and I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wasanic Nations on the west coast of Canada. Joining me today are Kristen Poppleton from Climate Generation, Isatis Cintron Rodriguez from Citizens Climate Lobby, and Jen Kretser from the Wild Center. More information on each of us can be found at the links in our resource document. While we are all North American based, we will present research from across the globe that relates to Action for Climate Empowerment efforts, both local to us and from other global contexts. Slide. We have 5 goals for this session. First, we wish to make all aware of resources from the UNESCO and UNFCCC Action for Climate Empowerment program. Second, we want to highlight research that relates to ACE efforts. Third, we want to explore examples of ACE implementation. Finally, we will define challenges and opportunities before making recommendations for future ACE efforts and national actions.
Thank you. My name is Isatis Cintron, and I am from Puerto Rico, even though I am North American based. Before beginning, we want to ensure everyone has a shared understanding of what we mean when we say Action for Climate Empowerment. ACE means Action for Climate Empowerment, and it's a specific program coming out of the Paris Agreement, Article 12, and the UNFCCC, Article 6. The program is designed to foster alignment, development, and implementation of ACE within national contexts across both governmental and non-governmental organizations. Part of implementation is to ensure that ACE is included in nationally determined contributions, NDCs, as well as the appointment of an ACE national focal point for each nation to coordinate efforts internationally. In most visualizations of ACE, you will see 6 elements listed in a linear format. These elements include education, training, public awareness, public access to information, public participation, and international cooperation. These figures from the UNESCO and the UNFCCC produced the ACE guidelines report show that the objectives of different elements and provide some further description of how these words are used in the context of ACE. Parallel and complementary to the SDG 4.7, Education for Sustainable Development, is also part of the ACE efforts. These figures from the UNESCO report illustrate the multiple ways that the word education is being expanded to mean learning and engagement in all areas of human activity to accelerate climate action and foster sustainability. One of the drawbacks of how ACE has been framed by the UN and governments to date is that it has been siloed on education and learning only, one of the six ACE elements. To accelerate climate action and ensure we have an informed and active society working together for climate solutions, we need a balanced implementation on all elements of ACE. We want to frame ACE for the purposes of this discussion to show how the various elements of ACE are fundamentally integrated, while at the same time also helping to show the nuanced multiple meanings of each ACE elements in different contexts of learning activity. We will use this image of ACE elements as a web of which is centered on accelerating climate action to guide our conversations. You might know that we have changed the language on the 6 elements of ACE, international cooperation. We argue that this element is more about coordination of networks across multiple scales, and that for some nations, there will be more work on these elements within their nation than there will be at the international level. The work of ACE sits within a constellation of other frameworks that foster people-centered climate action, including the Rio Convention Principle 10 of 1992, the Aarhus Convention of 1998, the Bali Guidelines of 2010, and the Sustainable Development Goals established in 2015. Action for climate empowerment work can be leveraged to accelerate the climate action work done within all of these other frameworks. The regionally based Escazú Agreement provides the first legally enforced framework in Latin America and the Caribbean, and seeks to guarantee the rights of access to environmental information, public participation in the environmental decision-making process, and access to justice in environmental matters, and the creation and strengthening of capabilities and cooperation, contributing to the protection of the right of every person, of present and future generations, to live in a healthy environment and to sustainable development. This actually helps the implementation of ACE within the Latin American context.
Now with a working understanding of what Action for Climate Empowerment is and how it originated, we'll explore some of the related research for this type of work. There are multiple fields of research, so we'll provide a sample of work in each area that is most likely to impact ACE efforts. UNESCO has synthesized research across the world about climate change education and education for sustainable development. Therefore, we will not duplicate this effort here, but instead point to the most recent reports in this area. This work informs primarily education efforts. again, only one of the 6 ACE elements, although it's integrated, as we've shown in our figures, with multiple ACE elements. In addition, Young-Go has been working on policy briefs and some emerging synthesis work on ACE that is also available to understand global youth perspective on how they see this work as central to accelerating climate action. Several key points can be drawn from this collection of work. First, ACE needs to motivate transformative action. Second, there are structural changes needed to ensure that ACE is not only enacted within national context, but also to ensure that there is systemic coherence across multiple scales and community contexts. Finally, this work indicates the need to ensure justice is enacted in design, implementation, and monitoring of ACE efforts. Transformative action research is found in a number of different respects with relation to ACE work. For example, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN has done work around engaging rural women across the world in public awareness, learning, and climate change actions that empower. This work is done in the context of women's everyday lives and addresses their pressing concerns with respect to climate change. Thus, learning in such contexts is fundamentally about civic and community engagement in diverse communities. It involves learning in relation to and with others in the context of place, and it fosters justice. Understanding how such transformative action is fostered can be gained through community-based design research, as outlined in Bang et al. 2016, and other more practice-friendly versions like the 2 books listed here. This type of research involves all those engaged in collective work to study what they are doing as they are doing it in research practice partnerships. To ensure that structural or systemic change supports action for climate empowerment work, research in social activity theory suggests that we need to ensure that people have opportunities to learn during activity that is meaningful to them, engage in such activity with knowledgeable others, preferably those with diverse perspectives, and are properly resourced in such efforts in terms of information, time, and money. Such resourcing is referred to as infrastructuring and is best when it is coherent and intentional across networks. Examples of this can be seen in the way that organizations give blogs at particular networks, such as policymakers, to foster climate action empowerment. It can also be seen in such activities as tribal climate camps, where people from distant contexts learn from and with each other about climate actions that interweave indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and practices with other forms of climate science. While much has been written about climate justice and justice more generally, there is a need to more closely document how the multitude of climate justice activities globally relate specifically to action for climate empowerment work to accelerate climate action. For the research that does exist in this area, we learn from multiple scholars, authors, and elders that just climate actions are best supported when we are working in relation to each other, in relation to place, and learning in the context of activity, all while acknowledging historical injustices in order to build more equitable futures. There are centers of research around the world that seek to carefully document examples of transformative action and how it can be used to support just and systemic climate action. A few of these centers are illustrated here. To ensure that we develop a coherent network that is well supported to foster action for climate empowerment activities, it is fundamental that these centers coordinate their work to avoid duplication, learn from each other, and foster timely innovations. This idea of deepening connections of ACE research efforts can be thought of as not working. The process of creating multiple connections among important network nodes. Such not working is critical to ensuring that the most effective use of limited ACE financial resources occurs. We will now look more deeply at several case studies of ACE implementation to explore how research, practice, and policy are interconnected.
Thank you. We live in an interconnected world, and in order for us to solve climate change, the first thing we need to do is to embrace complexity. And we can only do that together. The Paris Agreement remains the world's best shot at avoiding the worst impacts of a climate crisis. Implemented wisely, it can also unlock the inclusive growth story of the 21st century, improving lives around the world and reducing inequalities. Citizens Climate International at the core works to empower individuals to educate and work together with key stakeholders, policymakers, and the general public on effective solutions to climate change. We believe climate action requires empowerment of people and communities and diversification of decision-making bodies. We have presence in over 60 countries, representing an overall of 200,000 members. Since 2014, we have been working to create engagement opportunities to bring together stakeholders of all types with leaders of all levels of influence. This effort is intended to manifest one core principle, which we believe is also necessary to effectively counter dangerous climate disruption. By virtue of being alive, you are an environmental stakeholder. That is your legitimacy and your right to speak and to participate in all climate action. Wider engagement makes the policy design process smarter and more ambitious, allowing political will to emerge from both shared and localized climate action value insights. By involving people and communities in the design and policy priorities and implementation strategies, we can achieve a more diverse and adaptive curation of best practices rooted in local needs, capabilities, and actions, with the intention to expand the civic space in international, national, and subnational spheres. We launched the Citizens Climate Engagement Network in 2015 and developed a Talanoa facilitative dialogue based that's called Engage for Climate Toolkit. It invites and enables multi-level stakeholders, regardless of expertise and influence, to join structured meetings and provides actionable guidance to policy processes. This toolkit can be customized for any expertise, theme, or local need, as will be exemplified later in this talk. From this, the Open Cup emerged on the road to COP25. The Open Cup is really a series of different stakeholder engagement strategies that provide a blueprint for expanding the civic space inside the UNFCCC. The last-minute relocalization of COP25 diluted the focus on the problems that impact the Latin American region in a crucial time where climate talks are moving from negotiations to action. This led to themes of interconnection between climate change, migration, poverty, and inequality to have less of a front row. Moreover, the representation of Latinos was severely diminished because of resources and access issues. In hopes to support an open engagement with citizens and civil society, we organized several stakeholder meetings in different countries of the Latin American and Caribbean region and Africa. These countries included Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Nigeria. These full-day meetings allow collective brainstorming and reimagining a resilient country. Reports on climate finance, literacy, public participation, watersheds, and food system emerged. Additionally, it paved the way for a non-party stakeholder determined contribution in the Puerto Rico context. This guided our interventions as an organization and multilateral meetings with governments within the UNFCCC space. The outcomes and identify areas of opportunities from these multi-level meetings reiterates the needs of all ACE principles to unlock structural change and address key climate challenges of our time. In the Talanoa spirit, can you go one slide back? In the Talanoa spirit, the guiding principles for this civic engagement strategy are: all people are climate stakeholders, everyone has the right to know and right of access to best practice opportunity, and climate education must be a two-way process between citizens and governments. The outcomes and identify areas of opportunity from these multi-level meetings reiterates that we need all ACE principles, and an ACE and openness in decision-making provides a new sense of legitimacy. But how does an all-encompassing implementation on ACE could look like? Schools can become gathering places where students educate their elders and where policymakers learn from innovation-focused research and brainstorming teams. Local energy committees can take on responsibility for planning and implementing solar microgrids. City leaders can convene meetings with residents to design urban environments that meet human development needs, make transit more accessible and more efficient. Citizens can help policymakers develop an understanding of the climate connection to human impacts. Another example of a customizable model for public awareness and participation is the Climate Generation Talk Climate Institute that tackles the US disconnect between public high concern for climate change and low confidence in talking about it. The two-day program focused on crafting climate stories as a tool for action, increasing climate science understanding and the social justice intersections, and effective climate change communication. The Institute model is easily customized for any community, leveraging the expertise, local stories, and leadership.
All right, I'm going to share with you today about Washington's Climb Time Initiative. This is an emerging research effort in Washington State within the United States. It's a research practice partnership that involves a network of school and community-based educators to improve systemic and equitable climate education. This initiative is being co-led by the Department of Education in Washington State and the University of Washington. In addition, there are leaders across the network that receive grants through the state proviso, and that leadership network encompasses some 16 different organizations. Slide. The proviso was originally granted through a note from the governor, proviso it's called here, and that was done in 2018 to 19 was the first money that flowed. It was $4 million through this governor-initiated legislative proviso. In 2019 to 20, and then in 2020 to 21, which is our current year, we got continuation funding in the budget. And we will see in this coming year if the legislature will refund again. The initiative proviso language states that there were originally $4 million allocated from general funds in various grants to educational service districts, community-based organizations for science teacher training in Washington State. And it was to do with a set of standards, learning standards in the United States called the Next Generation Science Standards, including climate science education standards. So when the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards, were implemented in 2012 or 2014, they included climate science for the first time. And so this proviso is capitalizing on that idea that climate science standards are in the national standards and providing some funding to try and implement them. Slide. So the initiative was designed to center on educators with the intent that educators would influence the experiences of students. However, educators were not the sole focus of the proviso. Educators had to work with community-based organizations, universities, business, and local governments in ways that were very collaborative and unusual for them. And they also worked across the state in new and interesting ways. So this combination of networks, both across the state and with organizations and individuals that people had not worked with, was a fundamental component of the design of the initiative. Slide. So I'm going to give you just one example. The Climb Time project is quite enormous, and so I'll just give you one example. This was the Climate Science STEM seminars, and they were about learning in place. So these seminars had scientists, educators, administrators coming together in the context of a specific place and learning about a place, meaningful place-based phenomena. So this, one of these pictures is about sea level rise on the coast of Washington, and it looks at all different kinds of data sets. Teachers get right into what students would engage with and learn right shoulder to shoulder with scientists. They're able to ask questions, build confidence about these complex systems topics, and explore how to integrate that into their classroom context in local situations. Slide. Part of the way that this initiative has been able to really help educators is through building shared resources. Whenever a problem of practice arises, we build some type of tool or resource that addresses a particular question. So it could be something about how place-based science education strategies can support equity for students, teachers, and communities. And that will be resourced with experts from across the nation, sometimes from across the world, to be able to think together with how is it that we can actually answer that question. And then the one-page brief, which is 1 page, 2 sides, and it's a digital brief as well as a physical brief, is built, and you can click on it and find all different resources to be able to explore and adapt your curriculum. Any of the other resources built within the project are shared on the OER Commons site for Climb Time. One of the commitments that we have as a project is to ensure that all resources are free and easily accessible. Another aspect of the project that is emerging now is that and it's a research practice, is that we're building portraits of practice within the network to help share emerging learning before we are able to publish our research papers. These are all available online now. This effort is similar to other efforts. For instance, Climate Generation Teach Climate Network. Recognizing that educators are critical messengers of climate literacy and empower student climate action, Climate Generation has been building the Teach Climate Network since 2006, a community of educators across the United States and Canada to integrate climate change into their classrooms. The Teach Climate Network is a national network of educators dedicated to learning the newest teaching practices of climate change education and leading their communities to more equitable, long-lasting climate change solutions. Educators in the TCN attend Climate Generation's annual Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, learn best practices of climate change education through Teach Climate Tips e-newsletter, participate in community networking opportunities during Teach Climate Network meetings and workshops, and attend year-round professional learning development opportunities, trainings, and events. Additionally, Climate Generation has been holding in-person institutes for climate change education for 15 years, and for the first time held the institute virtually in the summer of 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. The Wild Center and NOAA's Climate Office were critical partners in planning and implementation, and the institute was planned around the 5 themes outlined in the slide, developed from best practice and recognized needs of the teachers at the moment. Goals for the Stay-In Institute included helping educators become more confident in their ability to teach climate change concepts and motivated to prioritize climate change concepts in all subject areas, offer content that is solutions-focused, action-oriented, place-based, equitable, hopeful, and youth-driven, create a community of educators across the country who are dedicated to climate change education, and model ideas for virtual education and learning, knowing educators may be virtual again in this year, which they are here in North America. Other efforts are also occurring in education fields worldwide. The Office for Climate Education in Paris is developing curriculum out of the IPCC reports, and Italy is also launching climate change education in all schools.
Good morning, good day. My name is Jen Kretser. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives from the Wild Center, a science center in northern New York State. I'm coming to you from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Haudenosaunee people. Our center focuses on igniting a connection to the environment where people and nature can thrive together and offer an example to the world. And we do this through educational programming, exhibitions, and outreach, as well as being a demonstration and education site for green building design and sustainability. Informal education institutions such as museums, zoos, and aquariums serve critical roles in community outreach and partnerships as economic engines, anchor and support education, provide job training, access to information. In the United States, over 850 million people visit informal education institutions each year. This is more than all the sporting events, amusement parks, and other leisure activities combined. Museums are considered the most trustworthy source of information in America in regards to providing education and information regarding global climate change. Museums have a 73% trust rating with the public. With this in mind, consider the critical role that museums, zoos, and aquariums have to play to operationalize action for climate empowerment through their exhibitions, programs, public engagement, and community outreach, as well as providing important coordination of partnerships between NGOs, schools, agencies, businesses, as a lever for collective action, as well as a catalyst for just climate action for the future. For the last 12 years, the Wild Center has convened, inspired, and empowered youth to learn about climate change, impact, and solutions through youth climate summits, leadership development, and community-based action projects that lead to intergenerational dialogue, action, and meaningful change. In this section, I'm going to focus on the ACE elements: education, public awareness, network coordination, and public access to information. So what is a Youth Climate Summit? A summit is a in-person 1 to 3 days or virtual event that convenes young people ages 14 to 21 to learn about climate science, impacts, and solutions. Youth participate in workshops, hands-on activities, poster sessions, networking with other schools and experts across sectors that are working on climate change. This model is a powerful vehicle for learning, community engagement, inspiration, and youth leadership development. Summits act as catalysts for youth to raise awareness about climate change and take action in their schools and communities. Research has shown that climate change will resonate with diverse audiences when 1, it is situated in a cultural context, 2, it is meaningful to the audience, and 3, it empowers specific action. Over the last 12 years, we've developed a suite of values and principles to guide our work, which collectively support an approach that anyone, anywhere can use to support and work in partnership with youth, create a strong climate action and youth leadership training program, and catalyze community climate resilience. The values include, those values include place-based. While climate change education needs to provide a global perspective, it is most relevant when it is local or regional in scale, where the impacts are tangible and often personal. It relies on partnerships and collaborations, which are essential. It is youth-driven. Youth have always led this work, from the original concept of our Youth Climate Summit to organizing and coordinating and building out action in their communities. It centers equity and empathy through workshops, speakers, and dialogue that bring true understanding to the disproportionate impacts on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it is hopeful, emphasizing that there's still time to address climate change through projects that they can initiate and act on, as well as hearing success stories from other youth is a key element to a successful summit. I'm going to focus right now on action-oriented and solutions focus. That particular principle is extremely important for our summits. While our participants show a 40% increase in their understanding of climate science and local impacts, it is the application of their knowledge that creates learning opportunities for students to build action competencies. If climate change education is to become a force of change, outcomes will need to shift from critical thinking to a solutions-focused action competence model, providing participants with the ability to evaluate an array of possible outcomes and choose and implement the one that best solves a given problem. The Youth Climate Summit model integrates this approach and encourages students to create their own solutions through a climate action plan process, while supporting students' leadership skills in order to implement solutions effectively. This contributes to a student's sense of agency and focus, and it is a youth-led process. We don't tell them what to do. So projects both in schools and communities vary widely, from building greenhouses or school gardens to solar-powered charging stations, conducting school energy audits, and organizing large-scale climate awareness events for their schools or community. This is a powerful means to see ACE in action, being led and driven by youth. I'd like to share an example how youth-led climate action plans can catalyze community climate resilience. As I mentioned, one of our core values is working in partnerships. One of our partners is the New York State Office of Climate Change, the Climate Smart Communities program, which helps local governments take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to a changing climate. The goals of the Climate Smart Community Certification Program are to engage and educate local governments in New York State, provide a robust framework to guide their climate action efforts, and recognize their achievements as they make progress. Staff from the New York State Office of Climate Change have come to our youth climate summits across New York State and do workshops on climate resilience planning for the students. High school and college students that have actively participated in those workshops at the summits see the program as a pathway to take action in their own communities, either by initiating a climate task force on their own or joining an existing task force, thereby increasing the capacity, technical know-how, and perspectives, particularly in small rural communities where we work, and this will assist them in the certification process. In Homer, New York, high school students actually lead the Climate Smart Communities Task Force, including scheduling meetings, setting the agenda, facilitating and managing communication with the New York State Office, as well as completing all of the required actions of certification, including the greenhouse gas inventories, decreasing energy use, shifting to renewables, doing community assessments, as well as planning all of the education and awareness events, and engaging with stakeholders across the community in their work. While this is a complex issue for local governments, especially in our small and rural communities across the country, the New York State Office of Climate Change sees how this particular program at the Wild Center is a critical asset to its work on climate change, and we are now helping to advocate and advance climate smart community work across the state. Our youth leaders are co-presenting with state officials on climate change at other youth climate summits, at conferences, community events, and to local governments. One of the staff at the New York State Office of Climate Change stated, "Education is a fundamental first step in taking action. The most effective local climate action programs are rooted in smart planning and educational processes that involve gathering information and helping communities evaluate their options." This new constellation of partnerships, the Science Center, high schools, and community leaders and government decision makers has resulted in a shift in conversation around climate change resilience, education, and adaptation with local rural communities, and how we can achieve successful collective action. You can find a video of this particular case study on our research page. Since 2009, the Wild Center has sparked and inspired over 85 youth climate summits in 45 different communities globally. We offer a suite of free resources on our website, including lots of different toolkits available for virtual and in-person summits, and we're always happy to connect with you if you're interested in this type of work. Finally, Climate Generation also has an amazing high school youth empowerment and public participation program. Has been a core program of Climate Generation for 12 years, founded by and led by youth, with a grassroots bottom-up philosophy of supporting youth leaders to take action at the intersection of their identity, concerns, and community need. In addition to teaching climate justice and solidarity in youth organizing, models climate justice in its leadership practice and centering BIPOC youth to guide a multiracial statewide youth network. Youth work in multi-generational coalitions with frontline communities to build intersectional solutions. Each winter, leaders plan a youth climate justice summit at the Capitol, bringing together youth from around the state for a day, which includes a youth-driven policy platform and peer workshops led by youth. Workshops include speaking with your legislators, understanding climate justice, and intersections with issues like housing, jobs, transportation, and other areas. And at their annual Youth Climate Justice Summit, core leaders invite partners from grassroots and frontline organizations to lead workshops and activities.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Kristen Poppleton, Senior Director of Programs from the US-based NGO Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy. We were established in 2006 by National Geographic polar explorer Will Steger out of his concern for climate change on the polar regions. Since that time, Our work has expanded to focus on empowering youth, educators, communities, and influentials such as policymakers, artists, and business leaders to engage in just and equitable solutions to climate change. We recognize the critical role that each of these audiences has in accelerating climate action, and we develop programs and resources to support them. We work at the intersection of ACE's key elements and utilize education and engagement as our key strategies to accelerate climate action, building climate literacy, developing powerful climate advocates, and elevating their leaders, their leadership in their sphere. Today, I want to share a little bit about our work with the business community, which plays an integral role in ACE's focus on network coordination and training. We've been engaging with the business community since 2012, at first informally, and then over a series of years building trust and partnership with several corporate supporters that recognized Climate Generation's expertise in climate change and asked for deeper support to engage with employees for climate communications and peer networking opportunities. The private sector plays an integral role in advancing climate change action, and climate-aware business leaders are key players in any effort to address climate change. While many businesses are making strong climate commitments, many companies admit that they have not been pushed hard enough to set bold climate targets, and peer support is important to help them ratchet up these ambitions, making them public. There's a number of great organizations and coalitions working with and pushing companies to commit to ambition targets, including Drawdown Labs, Ceres, and We Are Still in Coalition based here in the US. So Climate Generation's work is unique in its focus on training leaders to share their climate stories and utilization of peer networks to build pressure for increased ambition, developing, and finally the development of resources to help companies emphasize their green career opportunities. One role that Climate Generation plays is to help these individuals normalize their conversations on climate change in corporate America by offering convenings and trainings with business leaders and community partners. For example, in June 2018, Climate Generation hosted Minnesota is Still in, a leadership on climate action day-long workshop. This day-long event brought together over 75 business leaders, announcing their top 3 climate goals and making them public for the first time. Sustainability leaders from local nonprofits to Fortune 500 such as Xcel Energy, General Mills, Best Buy, and Target attended. At the event, we are also able to announce our intent to send a business delegation to COP24, connecting these sustainability leaders on the global stage to share their work, learn from other leaders through public participation, and elevate the role of the private sector in the United States during a time of federal inaction. Finally, recognizing the green careers are the fastest growing careers in the United States and that K-12 students need tangible experiences that will excite them for and prepare them for a green workforce. Climate Generation has developed a number of resources to support educators and schools. These resources provide meaningful career-ready education that prepares and inspires students to work in green careers, addressing social injustice and contributing to climate change solutions. A recent partnership with Train Technologies has allowed us to develop a program that train employees to go into classrooms to tell their climate career story, how their career is a climate solution, and engage in activities that bring their work to life. Another great example of public training and education here in the US is also at the Wild Center, a program called Build a Greener Adirondacks. This event convenes the construction community for commercial and residential buildings, including builders, planners, engineers, building suppliers, and architects. The focus is on best practices, sustainable and renewable technologies. And in addition to building public awareness and education, participants also learn about specific climate change impacts. Another example of using museums as a place for convening is this event following the devastating impact of Hurricane Irene held at the Wild Center. The Wild Center brought together local officials, disaster and emergency services, and other professionals to discuss the impacts of the hurricane, which included widespread destruction of roads and infrastructure. The event provided an opportunity for participants to share their stories of what happened to their communities and the challenges that they face. Again, an unusual role for a museum to play, however, rethinking how museums can be catalysts for providing access to information, public awareness, and building a network of engaged public officials. In rural communities in particular, museums anchor roles and often have assets such as space, technology, communication platforms, and staff not available elsewhere.
Thank you. Coming up, we have the ACE National Strategic Planning Framework for the US. And for this, we have building capacity, momentum, and a culture of climate action in the United States. Numerous actions and programs within federal agencies have made substantial progress towards building understanding and capacity to respond to climate change within various sectors of society. States, cities, tribal nations, national and community-based nonprofits, and private sector organizations have committed themselves to finding solutions. The ACE efforts have yet to be coordinated, but we see that K-12 career and technical education, community colleges, and higher education systems are working together for providing climate literacy. Exhibition and education programs at museums, aquariums, and zoos are working to promote this effort. On public access to information, we see efforts that work on messaging and information platforms in science, policy, public health, environmental justice, national security, economic, and businesses. There is also a wealth of ongoing surveys, evidence-based recommendations for public engagement that stem from social psychology and behavioral research. We also ignore the doers, and we also can't ignore the doers and action-focused social movements, institution, NGO-led campaigns, investor, legal action by BIPOC and youth who are committed to climate action. Now, if we can imagine that all of these elements or resources work together in a coordinated way, wouldn't we have a powerful catalyst for climate action if we were to leverage all the nation's capacity? So how we did the framework? Based on an adapt version of the Engage for Climate Toolkit that we talked before, we launched 4 dialogues around logical agrupations of the ACE elements. We started with a preparatory phase that took place in between each of the dialogues. And as with all the Talanoa dialogues, our consultations were guided by 3 main questions. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? The first phase was intended to give evidence-based guidance on the priorities to be discussed in each of the dialogues. Then we had community process, which included backcasting process within the dialogue, synthesis reports, and a robust strategic and community review process. We are entering the third phase now, which intends to give a policy signal for cohesive ACE integration and the development of a US ACE strategy. Thinking of the road ahead, we know that 2021 is a big year. We have countries upgrading their NDC and a new ACE work program to be established at COP26. So the ACE National Strategic Framework for the US is available through the US ACE community website. We are super excited to see that today this will be live and available for the community. This effort involved many people from across the US and engaged community-based participatory practices to ensure that participants often marginalized in the ACE work and in the climate action world had their ideas included in the final report. Other nations are engaging in ACE strategic national planning work as well. Being able to learn from each other's efforts as they are unfolding is going to be critical for the road ahead.
Now we'll explore some of the challenges, opportunities, and recommendations arising out of the examples and research presented so far. Governments of many nations have identified areas of opportunities to enhance ACE through their submissions in reviewing the Doha Work Program. A report by Caprini et al. This year provided insight into many of the challenges that face ACE design implementation and monitoring, including lack of financial resources, unbalanced implementation, lack of prioritization of ACE, siloed approaches, lack of clear targets and monitoring, difficulties with capacity building, and the need to fundamentally center justice in all design, implementation, and monitoring work. In addition to the challenges named by Caprini et al., there are other issues raised by researchers. For example, it can be challenging to ensure ACE work is organized around shared visions when language and goals are often underlain with cultural nuances and values. And we see this in terms such as climate justice, climate literacy, and even the word education. Differences in historical power dynamics also lead to challenges when working across cultural communities or different disciplinary or sectoral communities of practice. Finally, there has been an increasing attack on science and pervasive disinformation campaigns in some regions with respect to climate change. These issues impact ACE as well as all climate action work. The synthesis work of UNESCO and the UNFCCC, in combination with the other research presented here and in other locations, indicates that it may be beneficial to have an ACE constituted body at the international level. On the national scale, nations should include ACE in their NDCs in various ways, ensure they have ACE focal points defined, and engage in national strategic planning for ACE. One of the ways that we can elevate and make sure to visualize ACE in a way that is implemented across the Convention of Climate Change is through an ACE constituted body. This would help an action plan and move away from bright spots to true systemic transformational change. So from all of this work that we've discussed today, or to this point, we wanted to synthesize some of the key principles that we see emerging in the research. First of all, there's an engage in storytelling aspect. Storytelling has many different traditions culturally across the world. And what it does is it helps us bridge the understanding of the rational brain and the emotions. And climate change, really, we need to engage both. Second principle is around the equitable decision-making and participatory structures. If we're going to engage in a just future, we need to engage in just decision-making and participation with relation to learning, to empowerment, to public information and awareness efforts, and to international collaboration. We need to acknowledge, we need to be really transparent about the differences in assumptions and values across cultures. Those differences are the things that are impacted both by historical power dynamics and also by the way that we actually have access to different systems, have opportunities to engage in different careers, and can actually innovate around climate action. We need to acknowledge history and injustice. It's not enough to just say we'll start from here. We need to actually acknowledge past histories and injustice and harm to be able to build deep and meaningful ongoing relationships with each other to engage in this work. Because fundamental to these principles is the idea that we learn in relation to each other. We need to be able to explore options, innovations, and hope. And to do this, again, deep relationships are required. Finally, we need to define responsibilities and spheres of influence across different contexts. It's important to be very clear who is doing what, where, and how do we also build bridges across silos so we can learn from each other. To foster coherent networks, we need to think about some of the networks that are currently in place that could help with this work. These include networks like the Education, Communication, and Outreach UNFCCC community, ICLEI, and the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network, which is known as CLEAN. Each of these types of networks can help us in different ways be able to improve systemic coherence. In addition, we need to think about coherence related to planning. Planning for ACE requires coherence, and to work toward this, we need to engage nations and perhaps even subnational contexts in ACE strategic planning. This work has us engage broad networks in conversations to design possible strategies for implementing ACE. However, it is critical to design monitoring measures as well, and we'll come back to that in a second. To ensure ACE efforts are justice-centered, we need to work with those who have long engaged in climate justice work and are thus adept at fostering action for climate empowerment. Many in frontline communities are well situated to engage in research practice partnership work to document what they are learning while at the same time support their efforts at climate resilience. Women should also be highly empowered in this area of work, as they are known to be foundational to sustainable development, particularly with respect to accelerating climate actions. So we have a number of recommendations. The first is around landscape analysis. We need to be able to name who the networks are that can be engaged and can be linked together. We need to think about if there are gaps. Are there additional networks that need to be built and fostered or that are under-resourced? Part of this work is being done by MEES, the Monitoring and Evaluation of Climate Change Education Project, and others who are working in this space right now. We also need to engage more deeply, not only in research practice partnerships, but in research practice policy partnerships. These are cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary, and they engage just decision-making practices and funding structures. An example of that might be something like the McConnell Foundation grants to support research on what policymakers need to engage in climate actions. Next slide. Finally, we'd like to really name design-based research, particularly participatory and community-based design-based research, as these build on existing effective, highly effective community efforts. And we need to get away in this type of research, we need to get away from counting things and move toward casework on how best to design for contextualized ACE work, lifting these visions as visions of practice with thick descriptions that can support work in other contexts. We hope that you all stay safe in this difficult period in our shared history, and we thank you very much for being with us at this time. And we know that it's different times for everybody. It's extremely early in the morning here in our part of the world. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or interested in knowing more. And thank you again for being with us today.